And it's great to see you all today. I hope you find the session useful. We're going to run for exactly 90 minutes in total. I will have a brief break in the middle so we can stretch or grab a glass of water, whatever we need to do. I'll be running through a slide deck for most of the time. That's going to be available as a PDF afterwards. So there'll be links that you can access in that. So you don't need to worry about writing lots of stuff down if you don't want to do that. I'll just kick off then, if that's all right. I'm just going to share my screen so that you can see what I'm doing. So as Jen said, I'm going to be talking about remote working and supporting your team. I work in SCVO Digital, and we're a team within the Scottish Council of Voluntary Organisations that supports charities to make use of digital technology. And my agenda for today, just so you know what we're going to tackle, is we're just going to do a quick activity to kind of get us starting. Then we're going to break into groups of 3 to just reflect on the last 3 months of remote working that we've all experienced, how that's been. From that, we'll then highlight a few key issues, and we're going to bring just all the feedback into the room together. We're going to do that with an online poll, so don't feel worried that you're going to be speaking back to a room if you don't want to do that. And then we're going to move into just some solutions and strategies we can make use of to help our teams work better when we're all remote. And then at the very end, we're going to briefly reflect to make a personal action plan so that we can remember some steps to try back with our teams when we're back in the workplace. So just first of all, as a quick activity, we're going to put ourselves in the map. So what I'm going to ask you to do is you should probably see a tool to annotate. So I'm going to do one just to get us started. You can just put a little star on the map. I hope everybody saw me do that. So if you're able to, it should be on the little toolbar. You should be able to add yourself as a little star in this map of Scotland and beyond. Okay, great. I'm seeing a few start popping in. If you're from somewhere far, far away, maybe that's it. Somebody's got it already. Popped an arrow in, so somewhere farther south. Wonderful. So I'll just give people a minute or two because I'm aware that if you've not used this tool before, it might be a bit hard to find. Okay, how are we doing? Let me just look at the... Is anyone finding that a real struggle? Do you want to give me a little wave? Okay.
It's up at the very top, or for me
Yeah.
anyway. There's view options, and if you press that drop down, you get a tool called annotate from there, just in case. That's how it's shown for anyone.
Thanks, Jen. Sorry, I kind of just threw that at people there, so that explanation is really helpful. Okay, great. So we're kind of concentrated in the central belt. Somebody I think is a long way away, off in the North Sea somewhere. So yeah, that's great. So that's just to kind of give a sense of we're all around the place. And I think an interesting thing to reflect on in this session is that the thing about digital is we can be all together sharing information and learning together, but we're in very different physical places. And that I think can be a huge bonus, but it can also be a drawback. So I don't know what kind of tea you're drinking just now, whether you've had your lunch, whether you've had to miss it because you've been really busy, what's going on. So one of the challenges with digital teams is we don't necessarily know up front what kind of a day somebody's been having. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to clear that annotation because we want to move on to the next bit of the deck. But thank you for doing that, and I hope that was interesting to do. So let me just clear the annotations. See if Jen can do that. One sec. Jen, can you clear the annotations, or is that something I have to do?
I will try.
Oh, dear you there.
Clear all drawings.
Wonderful.
Yep, there we go.
Thank you. Great. Okay, so just a bit about myself. I've managed people, I guess, for 15 years, I suppose. And there's actually always been a bit of remote in my work, a very tiny bit in the beginning. And for most of the time with SCVO, we've always been a distributed team. I put this picture here because this is the desk I'm sitting at now. And the reason I'm including this is it shows it's a work in progress. It's not perfect. It's got some flaws, but it does the job. And I think that's a bit the same in terms of my management experience. So I've learned a lot along the way. I've got a fair bit of experience, but I'm not the world expert on remote management. And I'm sure that some of you will have insights and strategies that I've not heard about yet. And I think the thing about the remote working we're doing at the moment is nobody's an expert in this. So in the past, there'll have been teams that have decided in advance, let's work in a distributed way, let's work remotely as a kind of positive choice. But the experience we've all had in the last 3 months has been we've all been forced to do it really quickly overnight under quite a lot of stress and strain. So that is quite a different experience. So it's natural that it can feel hard. And also a lot of the books you might expect to go to for a bit of guidance don't really say much about it because it's a very unprecedented situation. So my image to kind of reinforce that point is it's life, Jim, but not as we know it. And people have recently begun to reflect on this. A really good blog article by Ben Holliday, who works in a service design agency, is it's not just a switch to remote working, it's a switch to remote working in a pandemic. And I've linked to this blog in the further resources later, but it kind of highlights a lot of the stresses and strains that we experience and maybe some of the ways we need to rethink our approach to managing remote teams. So what I'd like to do now is take a minute and break into threes, I should say. And we're going to stay in those threes for just, I think, 3 minutes. So I'll give a bit of time to make sure the breakouts work, and then Jem will bring us all back together. And I've got 2 questions for you to reflect on in those threes. I'll put them in chat as well, actually, so that they're easy for you to see. But basically, the first thing is, what's the biggest positive thing that you've experienced or seen since March? This might be something personal where you think, well, actually, I'm really good at stuff I didn't expect to be, or maybe something you've seen in your team where they've taken to it very well, and that's been a positive. And the second is, what's left? So what are you still trying to make sense of or figure out at this point? So those 2 questions we're going to reflect on in threes. We're doing it in threes just to make sure everybody gets a chance to chat. It'll be done randomly, so feel free to take a minute to sort of say your name in your 3 and a bit about yourself, but keep in mind you've only got 3 minutes to reflect on these 2 questions together. Is that okay? Everybody happy if we do that? All right. Okay, Jen, do you want to go ahead and make the
So you said we're
breakout?
going for 3 minutes?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, let's go for it. I'll just open the rooms now.
I think we're all back now. Great. So I think on reflection, I should probably have allowed 4 minutes for that, but that's life, you live and learn. Hopefully it was useful to kind of reflect a little bit in groups. I'm just going to share again so we go back to where we are. What I'm now going to do is actually put the question to the room. So I'm going to do that using Menti. I'll just share the Menti poll page. Let me find it. So it's the same 2 questions again, but if we do it this time, we'll get to see text coming up. So you can either do this directly from your laptop, if that's easiest, although obviously you'll have to look in another window to do that, or you can grab a mobile phone to do that as well. And I think, yeah, thanks, Jen. So you've shared the link to, so if you go to www.menti.com and type in the code 936929. Now I'll open voting, that would probably help, wouldn't it? Just check in chat, yeah. Is everybody able to access that and vote okay? Yeah.
I'm in. Oh, that's brilliant.
Great, thank you. I'm aware the first time we do a Menti, it's often a little bit tricky to get up and going, so I'm going to give people a minute or two to open some thoughts. Great, so some really nice positives coming in there. I think some themes are around having the right tech in place, meant people really well prepared to shift very quickly. A few have remarked that actually teams that are very scattered are actually perhaps more in touch than they've been locked down, which is an interesting one. Staff have been supportive of each other, and that people have been really able to adapt. So that's great. I'm just checking, has anyone not been able to pop stuff in? We're all looking happy enough? Grand. Okay, so now I'm going to go to the second question, which was the biggest issue you're still trying to solve. And I'm going to open voting. Sorry about me. Okay, so IT is coming in as a theme and maybe lack of resource to have that to a good level. How to run conferences and events and still be engaging even if they're virtual. There's that difficult balance of making sure stuff happens, but making sure staff are motivated and supported. Isolation, people are excluded if they've not got access or able to use technology. And balancing caring demands is a big one, and managing part-time working as well. So a lot of interesting themes there. And then thinking about blended support as well. Yeah. So quite a few coming on there. I'm just going back to the slide deck now, because I think I wanted to just go into a few key principles really. But maybe before I do that, does anyone want to chip in with any, particularly maybe around technology, does anybody want to highlight in a bit more detail what kind of challenges they're seeing there? You can pop a question in chat if you wish, or just speak up if you like to.
I'm happy to share technology-wise. My name's Kerry. I'm one of the volunteer and engagement and support managers at RNIB. And I think when it comes to technology, because we've got so many volunteers especially, as well as volunteer managers, that we're trying to move to remote working, trying to support those people remotely, those people with sight loss, in being able to use that technology, just being able to say to somebody, this is how you do this, it's just not a good solution. So I think that's where we're having a lot of difficulties. So not just being able to get the technology to people, just being able to make sure that their access needs are kind of supported as well.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. Yeah. Any other points under technology that people wanted to highlight? Okay.
Sorry, just
Yeah, go
Debbie
ahead, Debbie. Yeah.
Chris Springboard. Yeah, I think that the problem that we've found is trying to engage people in the kind of more informal conversations, the informal kind of natural sort of problem solving that happens when you're face to face in an office, or collaboration that happens when you kind of bump into someone and go, oh, I'm working on this, and they go, oh yeah, no, that could work, let's get together and chat about it. So we're kind of struggling on that side of things. And also,
Yeah.
you know, if you're running a meeting via Zoom, and you know want people to kind of commit to stuff, to taking on actions, it's easier for people to hide behind the screen and not kind of come forward. Whereas if you're in a kind of meeting room scenario, people kind of feel the pressure to say, yeah, okay, I'll do that, I'll take that on, kind of thing.
Okay.
So the screen enables people to maybe not volunteer to take actions on quite so much.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good point. Right, I'm gonna now hop back to Menti again, if that's all right. And because I've got another quick question. It's just I want to try and do here is get a bit of a sense of where we're at in terms of tech. So I'm just going to go to the next Menti question, and I promise to open the voting this time. That's not the next question. This is the question. And so it's really about your tech infrastructure. So all the kind of networks and systems and individual technology you've got. Where would you say you're at now in terms of your capability?
Nice emoji usage, John.
Yeah, thank you. I'm quite proud of that one. So I think nearly all of us have chipped in. I think there might be about 6 or 7 still. Well, yeah, 4 or 5 still to chip in. I'm just checking chat because there's a few results there. Yeah, thanks, Jen, for popping that code in. A few more. Okay. I'll maybe call time on that one because we're 6 forever. Would somebody who was saying systems are working a bit but slow us down, would anyone like to just say a bit more about what your current state of play is?
I'm happy to add something. Sorry, I haven't got a webcam on because
Sure.
I'm on a desktop.
Yeah, no problem.
Because we are all working from home, we obviously have limited admin access to our computers. So
Yeah.
there's often a bit of a delay trying to get software onto our laptops, and it usually has to be done remotely, which obviously then does slow things down. Plus we're all trying to access the same servers, and only so many people can access the servers at one time. So obviously that becomes a real difficulty sometimes if you're trying to get paperwork and information off the same server as everybody else.
Yeah. And what sort of size is your team, Gemma?
Our whole organisation has around 100 members of staff, but we also have about 300 volunteers. So I have 4 volunteer groups, and everybody has, you know, their own laptops. Some of us have work laptops and different access to different systems and different software. So it can be quite challenging at times to try and get everybody on the same kind of platform.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I think one theme you definitely see on the technology side is if your organization has a cloud-based system like Office 365 or G Suite, it can be quite a smooth transition. But if you're still trying to dial into a network, connect into a network, that can be quite a bit more clunky. So it can be tough. Okay. Anyone who's saying it's working well want to say anything about that, or is it just that it's working well and we don't need to say more detail? Okay, all happy. Just thought in case anybody wants to give a shout out and say, Heather, did you want to say something?
Well, I was just going to say, like, for us, I do community engagement. My team is really small, so my team is very good with our system and the way that it works, but the community doesn't necessarily engage with us on that level, which is one of the sort of issues. And that's more what I mean when I say, like, with some hiccups, is a lot to do with trying to teach other people when, you know, for example, with Zoom, it shows up differently depending on what device that you're on. So you can't put like a standard tutorial, like people won't link in with YouTube videos if they're a certain length. And it's that I find quite hard to engage our community with our system.
Yeah, that's true, definitely. And I think, you know, charities have to interact with lots of people all the time, so it's often a challenge to make sure those ways we're reaching people stay accessible. Okay, I'm going to hop to another quick question now. I hope it's all right to do all this quizzing and questioning, but I think it will help kind of embed some of the stuff we do. So this one is just thinking about how your capability might have changed over time. So thinking about, first of all, before COVID, if any of us can remember back that far, did you feel that your remote working, was it something you were struggling with? Maybe it's something you'd not done at all, in which case maybe score yourself quite low. Was it something you're already quite confident with? Then thinking about the early phase of lockdown, was it working well or was it a challenge? And then thinking about now, okay, good. My hunch about this was people would hopefully be finding it easier as time went on, so that's encouraging. I think about half of us have responded now. Okay. Right, we've got 20 responses there. I think we'll run with that for now. So I guess what's interesting is pre-COVID and during lockdown are kind of about the same. So it probably didn't feel all that comfortable. But now I think people are saying, oh, so sorry, Linda, I'll just read out the question. Linda, are you able to see a spot to answer? It says, the question is, how comfortable does your team find remote working? We're asking it 3 times. We're asking before lockdown, during lockdown, and right now. Feel free if you want to just chip it in on chat. That's easy enough if you want to do it that way. Okay, so in general, we're seeing people have moved to a place of greater comfort, which is encouraging. I'll stop that share because I don't need that anymore. And I think what's interesting, I was reflecting on this whole question of managing remote teams. And if you do like research or look for books on this topic, most of them are about tech companies that have made a kind of strategic choice to do that. You know, they've decided, right, we don't need an office. Maybe half our team's in San Francisco, the other half is in New York. So they're doing it from a kind of place of, you know, we can take our time and get it all right. But the challenge we've all faced is we've had to do it overnight in much less than ideal circumstances. So that's quite different. So I think that's something to keep in mind, you know, all the time, maybe when we're thinking about, is our team being as effective as it can? We should always be keeping in mind that we've all got lots of challenges we're grappling with. So we shouldn't really be expecting 110% performance all the time at this point, because I think that can be a recipe for burnout. Hannah has just noted in chat that her team's adapted well, but service users maybe not adapted quite as well, and there've been some challenges there. And I think that's a common enough story, I would say. So having had that reflection, just to kind of think about where we're at now, I'm just going to maybe now start to highlight a few kind of key principles to keep in mind. When I was writing these, I was thinking, actually, my own situation is a funny one because at SCVO, we've always had very good IT kind of platforms and so on, so we were very well placed to move remotely. Also, as a team, we've always worked partly from Edinburgh, but also from Inverness and Glasgow. So we've always had to manage that remote connection to some extent. And in general, we would often be one of us working from home 1 day a week, that kind of thing. So it felt like the foundations were already there, but actually we found it's not the same to suddenly leap to working remotely overnight. So in part, some of these insights I'm picking up now are about experience. So we thought it was all going to be much easier than it was. The first one I would note as my kind of principle I try and follow is what we call no blockers. So in the software world, a blocker means something that's stopping you doing your job. So I think somebody mentioned earlier not being able to install software because they didn't have admin rights in their PC, or maybe a manager needs to sign off something so you can't actually send it to an external person that day. So what tech companies that have done remote working for a long time tend to do is always think in terms of minimizing the number of things that could trip people up and hold them back. So a good example would be if you're about to head off on holiday, it's making sure your team have all the sign-offs they could possibly need so that they're not piling stuff up until you come back. And it's not just about technical access, it's also about autonomy. So maybe you're saying, go away and get 3 quotes and pick out the one that is best value to you, or whatever it might be, so that people aren't getting stuck where they say, well, I've done my research and got information back, but I can't progress that until my manager's back in the room. And I think that's a particular thing right now because a lot of us are working on a part-time or flexible basis. So you can end up holding people up for a day or two. The other side of this is if you give people that autonomy and access, they'll feel more empowered to get on with stuff and do it well. Another policy that I've picked up, this is a shameless sort of borrow from a book called Remote, is steering clear of the M&Ms. And what they mean by M&Ms are pointless meetings and micromanagement. So you might ask, what's a pointless meeting? And I think the answer is one that doesn't really have a clear agenda or focus. And I think one of the things that quite a lot of organizations slipped into as lockdown started was because Zoom was there as a great platform, they suddenly went, well, we can have lots of Zoom meetings all week. And so the advantage was it was real-time communication and you could really update the whole team at once. But if people are trying to do work in limited time, having 7 or 8 Zoom meetings a day is, first of all, it's really tiring. And secondly, it doesn't leave you with much time to do the actual work. And the other M here is micromanagement. And in a digital context, micromanagement can manifest as replying to emails really quickly or odd hours, or kind of doing lots of messages on a Slack channel or something like that. And sometimes as a manager, you might feel, well, I want to be really in touch with my team to let them know that I'm really available. But some team members can find that a bit claustrophobic. They maybe feel that their manager is just always there. So avoid the micromanagement if you can. Another strategy that this is actually reflected on in the Ben Holiday blog I mentioned at the start is about using asynchronous communication instead of FaceTime. So the way Ben Holiday puts this point is just spending large parts of your working day in Zoom meetings isn't actually a very effective way of working. So if you've got a distributed team, a quite effective way is writing a really clear and focused email and then giving your team member a deadline to get back to it. So then perhaps if they're doing some caring responsibilities in the morning, but they're going to pick it up in the evening, give them all the information they need to run with it. Obviously, you need to know people's working patterns for that to work well, but that can be a really effective way of keeping people empowered to get on with things and not tying them up with lots of FaceTime. And just a point related to this is what I would call working in the open. So as a manager, you want to kind of know how things are progressing, know whether something's going to get completed to a deadline. I think a really ideal way of doing that is have your team sharing work in progress. So if you're on something like SharePoint or Google Docs, you can all be looking at the same link. Maybe somebody's still working on the document, but you know maybe by 3 p.m. you're going to get it finished. I think your team should feel comfortable to do that. I think in some teams, people might say, oh, well, I don't really want to share the rough draft with my manager because it's not going to be good enough. But I think if you're in that situation, then that's maybe raising a challenge about the way your team works, because in reality, you should be comfortable with doing that. If you don't have that confidence and openness to share work as you go, what you can end up falling back to is what I'd call presenteeism and waffle. And by that, I mean arranging meetings just to say, well, I haven't got that done yet, but I'm going to do it tomorrow afternoon, or writing an email status update right at the end of the day just so that somebody feels something has been happening. In an ideal world, your team should be in a place where you're feeling completely confident about sharing rough drafts, because you know that somebody's not going to jump in and squash it right away. They're going to accept it as something you're working on and pick it up when you've done with it. This is another quote from the Remote book, and it's called "Stay in Sync, Thou Shalt Overlap." And I think this is a really interesting point with digital channels and remote teams, because if you're sharing the same physical location of an office, you're probably in there for mostly the same kind of working day. So that gives you an opportunity to pick things up in the margins. So maybe you meet while you're making a cup of tea, or you wander over somebody's desk. And the kind of insights that gives you is how somebody's doing mentally, whether they're under a lot of stress with deadlines or whether they're comfortable with a bit of space in their schedule. And if you're working in a distributed way, that can be quite hard to do, particularly if people are juggling childcare responsibilities or caring for relatives or friends. But I think quite a good practice as a team is to maybe have a day or a part of the week where you know that that's a time where you're all overlapping, and maybe also to mark it in your diary so you're not filling it with other commitments, but you've got that time available to each other if you need it. Another principle, and I think this came up earlier, people were mentioning that there's less opportunity to socialize. The reality is, if you're socializing virtually, is it can feel super awkward. So you're not all going to a nearby pub or going out for a walk or whatever you might do. You're kind of sitting there looking at a grid of faces on a laptop. It's going to feel difficult, but we know from our experience with SCVO is it is worth putting the effort in, because if you don't do that, what you start to do is lose track of how you are as a team. So probably most of us would have shared an office in February this year. If we've had really minimal social contact all through that time, you start to lose track of how people are doing. And with digital channels, yes, you've got voice and video and text, but they're not that good of, they don't really convey body language very well. So you can't tell whether somebody's putting a brave face and actually feeling really difficult, or sometimes it's easy to miss stuff. So that's why we found putting a bit of time in place to do regular social stuff is a really important thing to do. And just to emphasize, it will feel really awkward because it's a way of socializing we're not comfortable with yet. So,
John, sorry to interrupt. Are you sharing screen at the moment?
Am I? No, I wasn't.
So.
I beg your pardon.
It's okay. There was nothing that didn't make sense. I just thought, I'm looking at your slides. That's why.
Right. So I'm really sorry about that. So all it was where. So did I not share from the Mentee point? Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, the slides are very simple. They were just kind of big text of what I was saying. That's all going to be available afterwards. But we've now got up to tools and shared practices. But what Jen just did was a really good example of something I'll be coming on a bit later, which is called psychological safety. So there's been a lot of research that comes from the airline industry, where in the 70s there were loads of crashes, and they actually found out that what was happening in some airliners was the first officer knew something was wrong, but felt a bit scared to say it. So he thought, well, this captain's been flying for 30 years. I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to make him look stupid. So the principle of psychological safety they uncovered was that if you can encourage a dynamic in a team where somebody says, hang on a minute, that's not right, then that leads to safer and better teams. So Jen there was able to say, this seems a bit odd, I'm going to chip in and say it. And the reality is, I guess if she hadn't done that, I might have carried on for another 20 minutes.
It took me a
sharing my
couple of
slides to
minutes.
myself.
It took me
Yeah.
a couple of minutes.
Um, And in a lot of the literature you'll read on remote teams, they talk about getting to a psychologically safe kind of open place is a really good place to be, because digital channels can really paper over the cracks. So you can get a situation where it looks like your team is really on board and okay with an idea, but actually underneath the surface they're going, this is a load of rubbish, we don't want to do this. So working on that kind of social activity and also sharing what people think of stuff is a really important thing to do. So having talked about socializing, I'm now going to take a mini break for 5 minutes. So this is just a chance to stretch your legs, get a glass of water, whatever you might need to do, and we'll come back together at, shall we say 10 to 3? Is that okay? Happy with that? All right, pop your camera off and your sound off if you need to do that, but do stay on the call and we'll see you shortly. Okay, so I ran through those kind of core principles, and they're a lot around really your team dynamics and things like that. So Hannah had an interesting question in chat, which was around kind of frequency of catching up and whether that should be, you know, whether is there an ideal one or whether you should go guided by what team members need. And I think one thing we've done in our team is to try and make a separation between work updates and personal one-to-ones. So generally speaking, individual one-to-ones are about once a fortnight. That seems about right. That's a bit more frequent than you would do if you were sharing the same building, because I think it helps with that sense of, you know, we found amongst our team, you know, some people have had times that felt great, you know, maybe they felt they got lots of spare time because they weren't commuting and things like that. But then quite suddenly it can tip into dealing with, you know, family crises and things like that. And I think catching up a little bit more frequently can help with that. One thing we do with our one-to-ones in SCVO is we try and use a coaching model, which is all around kind of encouraging people rather than doing a long task status update. It's really about how that person's doing, what's been a positive highlight for them, what the manager can do to help them get over any blockers, and then also just anything they want to run by the manager as a kind of, I'm not sure about what to do on this. So we try and focus it that way, so it's not a big long agenda of task updates. And that goes back to that point I was making, where if you've got ways of sharing what status work is at using digital tools, that means when you do have face-to-face time, you can focus that more on kind of qualitative questions about how a person's doing. Are there any other questions at this point about some of the stuff I talked about just before the break, or specifically about that question around one-to-ones? Feel free to either ask in chat or chip in. Okay, we're content. That's fine. If something does come up, just shove it in chat and I'll try and keep an eye on chat now and then, but also Jen may highlight them as well. So we'll go forward now. We'll do the next few phase where I'm just going to talk about some of the tools that we use in SCVO. I'm not offering these as a perfect solution. They're just practices that we've adopted that have helped us. And you may find that you've picked up things through different sources that have helped you and your team as well. Okay, let's see chat. I'm not advancing the screen just yet, but thanks Marwa for flagging that. Let me get my sharing controls. Going to resume. Right, off we go. So, tools and shared practices. Everybody seeing that share okay? These are some things we've been doing actually for quite a long while as a digital team. So we'll just talk through them. So we haven't done one in person for a while, obviously, because there's been lockdown, but we do team away days. And we generally, for those, focus on how we're all doing as a team. Vanessa, you're asking about finishing on time. My understanding is we had until 3:30, but I'm willing to be corrected on that. Yeah. So we're set to run until 3:30. There's not a load more content from me. The last part would be individual action plans. So we're definitely going to be done by 30:30. If you have to go before then, don't worry about it, and we'll send you the slide deck afterwards. Okay. Right. So when we do our away days, we try and build in activities to help us get to know each other a bit, because particularly our colleagues who are based in Inverness, they're not sharing an office all the time, so it's useful to have that. And we find that's a really good investment, because it then means when we do lots of contact through remote channels, we already have a good feel for how each other works. We spend a bit of time as well on how we do progress measures. So how do we get an update when something's moved forward? Where do we go to look for information? And how we use team communications. We use Slack as our primary means of staying in touch, but we have a little agreement about how we use that. And that, I think, really helps people protect work-life boundaries as well, because people understand if somebody's set us away in Slack, they're not going to respond until they're due back in the office. Things like that. So that's my next point again, obviously, about using your calendar and messaging status fields to share when you're around and when you're not. But the main thing with that is that there's not a presenteeism pressure. So there's not a big pressure in the team to say you're going to have your available green dot switched on for 7 hours every day or whatever it might be. There's an understanding we're going to need to flex, and that it's primarily that we get work done, and we're using the status to say, here's a time when I can be in touch if you need to reach me. The other thing we do is on Slack, we have a random discussion thread, and that's where we share all the stuff. It's maybe significant birthdays, it's maybe what our kids or pets have been up to, it's maybe if we've slipped over and given ourselves an amusing injury. It's a very random discussion. It would be the kind of thing you would be talking about if you're in the same physical office. And that's a really helpful thing, because A, it's fun to look at, but also B, it means that we're a bit more aware of what's going on in everybody's lives. Okay, so that's some of the tools. And what's interesting about those is they're not necessarily technical, they're just practices we have as a team that help us stay more in sync and stay more in touch. Looking quickly at the technology now, because technology is a big part of it. As I said, we had a really good set of technology before lockdown started, so we're in quite a privileged position. So Slack is our instant messaging platform. So that's where we update each other, both the whole team at once and in one-to-one messaging. We use a lot of Office 365 for creating documents and sharing them. We also use Teams, because that's a platform for the whole SCVO. We use Outlook Calendar a lot, so and that's been an interesting contrast with our digital team and other groups that we work with. Is you could probably phone any one of us up and say, where will so and so be on such a day, and we can tell you, because people are very rigorous in updating their calendar. And I think the advantage that gives is that gives other team members confidence about knowing, right, well, I'm pretty confident that my colleague Claire could pick that up on Friday because it looks like she's going to be around. So that helps a lot when you're not sharing a physical space. Obviously, Zoom is the video conferencing platform that everybody's using. And then we use Google Drive with other teams. A tool we use a lot for our planning and showing how we're progressing with tasks is Trello. So if you've not seen that, it's a really good shared task manager. You can both show an overview of tasks and have a lot of detail attached to them as well. So that's very effective. So we use all those tools together, but those don't work, they're not magic wands. They're not working because the software is doing the work for us. It's because we as a team have thought about how we're going to use them. The next two is dead simple, and I think you can't say it enough that it's really worth over communicating as a remote team. So that's not in a kind of sending a Slack update every 3 minutes or something like that, but just being really clear. So maybe as you put together a note, making sure it's not ambiguous and making sure it's clear. And also, like that psychological safety point we were making, giving team members a space to come back and say, that's not clear, can you clarify? Because if you communicate badly, if you're sitting at home in your home office, you've got no body language or vibe to pick up on. So if an email's been badly put together and it lands with a team member in a bad way, that can be pretty difficult to fix. So it's really important to try and get it right the first time. The other thing, which is like the flip side of this, so this is my son running across a beach, and the reason I included this picture is to reinforce that point about giving people space. So he's going to charge off across the beach. He might trip over, he might dig a big hole, whatever, but he needs to have the space to do that. So, if you've got a team of people who are capable, the more space and time you can give them to do the work you'd like them to do, the better. If you're putting digital presenteeism pressure on them to be online or accessible or responding to your needy update requests, then that's going to slow them down. So if you do the structured meetings right, then hopefully your team will feel they've got good chunks of time to go away and do work and solve problems. So that's me whistling through our practices section. Does anyone have any questions off the back of that? Maybe any detailed questions about technology or anything else? No? Yeah, Catherine?
I've just got a question about, I think you referred to earlier, Zoom is what everyone's using, which I think is right on the whole, but there seems to be certain proportions of folk that aren't able to use it. There's maybe organisational restrictions, and certainly Scottish governments. I don't know whether there's a workaround or people have found kind of a way around that, because we facilitate a lot of kind of national forums.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Good point, Catherine. So Zoom has been the kind of market leader just because theirs has been the easiest to use platform. So I think the features that really make people like it is the fact that you can join from a wide range of devices. You can also hold quite large meetings on it where everybody's visible like we are now. Teams and Google Meet, which are the equivalent products in Microsoft and Google, they're basically playing catch up. So within a month or two, their feature set will be very similar. So I know that Teams will have a kind of a large meeting type call available very soon. So what we've heard from colleagues who do a lot of public sector link up is Teams is a good platform to use because it's very closely managed under your Microsoft domain. It's maybe got a few little wrinkles in the feature set at the moment, but we know that in time they'll get very close to what Zoom is. Another platform that some organizations use is Cisco WebEx, which is a very similar product to Zoom, but has some more options in terms of managing it that can help risk-averse organizations feel comfortable with it. But I think the bottom line with video meeting platforms is unless you're literally discussing state secrets, so working with people who are maybe vulnerable to state espionage, something like really, really sensitive, as long as you're managing the platform well, they're all on more or less of a par. So it's really about what's your approach, have you got it set up right? Are people that, so one example would be here with this event, Jem was pre-screening people to make sure that they were genuine people interested in this training rather than people randomly looking to mess up a meeting. But yeah, it is a good point. You need to kind of check in on what your partners want to use. I think one thing I'd say as well is if you've got one platform that you use a lot, it's really good if that's well integrated with your calendar. So then you're not having to do the game of who's got the link for the meeting. Is it the same as last time? It just should automatically appear in a meeting invite. That can really help people find it easier to be involved. Any other quick questions on this point? And can I maybe just ask a question to the room actually about who's using an instant messaging platform like Teams or Slack? Do you want to give us a wave if you are? Reasonable number. For people that aren't using it, are you using email or things like that? Or are you doing more meetings to catch up? Okay, nobody's going to jump in. I would encourage you to look into them, because if you do make use of them, they're very effective tools in the sense that they can move as fast as a WhatsApp chat, but they're also quite well organized and you can use search to find things. So they're a very useful tool. And we find for us as a team, it's really reduced the volume of email. So we don't get snowed under with internal email. We know that email is the place where external people contact us. But on the other side, it's probably cut down in the number of face-to-face meetings we have as well. We can often resolve things in a quick Slack thread rather than having to arrange a meeting. So they're worth looking at. And the other thing is messaging systems do work in real time, but they also support asynchronicity as well. So if you're setting stuff up for a colleague who's going to see it the next morning, it'll all be there nicely organized in a message thread, so it's easy for them to catch up. Okay, oh, there's a lot in chat, so let's catch up with that. Yeah, so emails is a really, yeah, I think the thing with email is it's definitely not ideal because it's got drawbacks, but we also know it's something we've become familiar with, so it can be hard to move people onto new channels. And I think one of the challenges is if it's ambiguous in your team how messages are going to come through, then people feel under pressure to check both places. So what we did as a team was we enforced it quite strongly and said Slack is where we're going to have the primary discussion, so that's where everybody went, and that was a useful thing to do. So I'm now going to chat you through a few resources. These will all come in a PDF with links, so don't worry about scribbling them down. So the first is, this is from somebody who works at Automatic. Now, Automatic are the company that developed WordPress, which is apparently a quarterly internet runs on WordPress. So it's a very popular platform. And the points Bo is making here is there's this huge difference between choosing to work remotely and getting it all working nicely and having to do it overnight under extreme stress. So he's also saying you don't let the stressful times prejudice you against remote work completely. And a really useful link that Bo has got there is they've got a big guide onto how they as a company, which is across multiple time zones and continents, approach their remote work. It's a very interesting document. So our next slide, I've just got a long list here. We've written a guide to remote working, so we pulled together a lot of resources, which should hopefully be of use. There's a DigiListen podcast. So we've run a podcast now for several months, and on that session we had a couple of experts. We had Ali from Be More Human and somebody called Bruce Daisley who's written a really good book called The Joy of Work. So they're giving really interesting insights about how you get a good culture going at a team that's not all in the same place. I flagged the Ben Holiday blog already. Now this next one, a user manual from me, is actually a really interesting tool. Has anybody heard about that before as a technique, a user manual for me? No. Okay, so what it is it's like a template and it's a grid with about 8 questions on it, I think. And it's basically talking about how you like to work. So if I was completing a user manual for me, I might say things like, I work better first thing in the morning, I like to reply quickly, I like a mixture of my working day. So what you basically do is write a kind of description of what helps you work well. And this is not a rigid thing that your team had to follow all the time, but it just helps them understand what's going to help you be effective. And we've done that a few times as a team. What's been interesting with that is it's thrown up the diversity of the way we work, but we also think, oh, right, well, if that colleague really appreciates having a bit of time to reflect, then let's try and structure our processes so that we support that, because if we put pressure on them to answer straight away, they might not do it very well. So the user manual for me can feel a little bit like it's a bit navel gazing, but it's actually quite a useful technique to kind of make your team talk about different ways that we work. Sorry, I've skipped slides by mistake. Checking chat. Yeah, Catherine, that's a really good point. There is a, I think there's related tools out there which are very helpful. There's a website called almanac.io, has a huge list of templates for distributed and remote teams. There's a book called Remote Office Not Required, that's by people who founded Basecamp. And I think an interesting pinch of salt to put in with that one is they're talking about, you've got a blank sheet of paper and no pressure to do it in a hurry. How would you do it well? So it's worth keeping that in mind, given that we're all doing it under crisis conditions. Quite an interesting blog post I read is about the trauma of Zoom. So this is one talking about how, why is Zoom so tiring is basically the question. And there's a few things. So one is you often always see a picture of yourself, so that's a bit tiring. Well, it is for me. And then there's that feeling of it's like a face-to-face conversation, but it's not really like a face-to-face conversation. So that's a kind of interesting one to reflect on. And I think maybe if you're under pressure from some team members to do wall-to-wall Zoom calls, I'd maybe send them to that link, because it's an interesting one to reflect on. And then final one is a tool that we've used. It's called 16 Personalities. So it's like a little Belbin personality quiz. Now, it's important to be clear, these are not scientific, so it's not like you're going to kind of diagnose people and say, oh, you are a this kind of personality, that's you marked forever. But what it does do is highlight just different strengths and weaknesses. So some people are very quick to jump to judgments, sometimes too quick. Other people take their time a bit more. So doing a bit of that thinking together has helped us as a team, because then we understand, right, well, you know, just because you work in a different way doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just the way that you work. And I'll try and adjust my working style to take advantage of that, rather than try and undermine each other all the time. So that can be a useful exercise to do. And you can do it online, and you get a little kind of summary of what that person is like, but you also get loads of detail, like which famous celebrities have this personality type, although I have no idea how they calculate that. There we go. Okay, so those are just big list of tools. As I say, they're all linked, so you can jump in and do them. What I'd now like to do is jump to your next steps. So I'm going to need to hop back to Menti to show that. Here we go. Whistling through, I've got to jump back over all the other questions. Oh, somebody's already there. That is fine. But I'm going to look in chat now, because so Linda, you'd asked a question about tech IT support and training. Do you want to say anything more about that, or? It's fine if you don't. So did you want to say anything more about the lack of tech capacity? Was it around staff skills, or was it around the systems that you're running?
Yeah, we found some of the systems fine. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just been our internal our systems that we have with Nation Builder and things like that are fine. It's just been the speed with which we've had to get staff to work at home, and then finding if we needed any sort of IT glitches or things like that sorted out. We don't have access to like a support line. We can't afford to have an IT person paid for on a regular basis. So we just haven't found anywhere that's worked for us in terms of applying for money for resources or for a bit of IT support. We've just had no support at all with that. So we've struggled with that on occasions.
Yeah. Do you find there's like a range of expertise in your team? Like, are some people quite adept at technical things, or are they all struggling a bit?
No, some are okay, and within their roles in their job, they've been able to carry on very specific, like database updating and things at home, and that's been fine.
Yeah.
But yes, I think it's just, and we've moved some of our online learning quite successfully through GoToMeeting. But I'm just aware that we could have done with access to extra laptops and some training on specific items, and we've just not been able to access that.
Yeah.
I think just generally
it is difficult.
The strain of the move to home working and being expected to do it all, relatively quickly has been difficult.
Yeah. It's definitely not the easiest. I think one strategy that's I've heard some organizations using if they need a bit of user support is if you've got team members that are really good at doing that, try and tweak their job description a wee bit so that they maybe got a little bit more time available. And something you can sometimes do is set aside a block of time. So I know our IT team, what they've done is they've got a designated time on Tuesday and say, if something's holding you back, you don't need to kind of put in a formal support request, come along to this session and we'll see if we can chat through with you. And that can sometimes be a way of opening up a bit more support, but doing it in a way that doesn't put a really big burden on people. But it is difficult if there's not a big internal capacity, certainly. Okay, any other questions or thoughts at this point? Grand. So you're all updating stuff brilliantly on the 3 things you'll do next. So really it's a chance to kind of think about what we've talked about over the last hour and a bit and think about what 3 things you take away. So like one thing you might be able to do in a day, something else that might take a little bit more, like a week's time, and then something else that's like a longer term project. Yeah, so some really good actions there. I was just thinking, and I'll let them scroll for a bit so you can see each other's answers. That text will be captured in Menti. It won't be tagged to anyone's name. So what we may do, Jen, is perhaps just attach that as a kind of PDF. So you'll get back a big list of what everybody else is committed to doing or noted that they want to do. So hopefully that'll be a helpful resource to remind you of what you're up to. Yes, Linda, there will be. Yeah. So we'll share that. Well, I think we can share a whole link to the whole all of the Menti questions, so you can look at them together. Okay. That's got me through all of the content I wanted to share with you at this point, so I'm actually quite a bit ahead of schedule. But there is time if anybody has any other questions they wanted to talk about. But I can also chip in a few more ideas if that's helpful. I'm just checking chat to see if any questions have come up. Arlene, are you using Google Chat in your organization? Is that right?
Yeah, we use all the Googles. We have Gmail, which is what we use for, and we're Google Calendar and a shared G Drive. So it just made sense for us. So we've set up a Google Hangout that stays open all day just for like general chit chat. And then we use Google Meets to video call each other.
That's a good idea. And I think that kind of open channel can be really useful because people can just ask for a quick update or share something and people will pick it up when they're free. So yeah. And when you set that up, did you have any discussion about how you'd use it or you just kind of went for it? And
We set up the very first day of lockdown. Well, it was actually the very last day that I was in the office. Right before the lockdown started, it was just really quickly, we thought, right, we need to set up a quick chat just for everybody to stay in touch. And I think it just kind of evolved into, you know, it's, if people are working during the day and they've got a question, they'll just put it up, or they'll put it up and say, I've just had a really bad call, anybody got 5 minutes to talk or whatever, you know. So it's just a way of just staying in touch. But they also, I mean, all our staff use it to post music videos and cheer each other up when they're getting a bit down and stuff as well. So it's been quite good. It's a good thing to have.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's the bottom line is, you know, if you're in the same physical office, you do that kind of informal chat, which is really valuable in supporting each other. And so having a digital way of doing that is really useful. Yeah.
I'd be quite interested to know if people are using these tools and making plans in the anticipation that this will be a short-term thing, or is this very much, you know, since the lockdown, are you planning for an entirely new way of working, the way that, you know, your service delivery, your internal communications, how that's going to be long-term? Do you think that's going to have changed, or do you think as normality, whatever that is, starts to come back, do you think it will all revert back the way?
I think we'll probably have a mixture of both, and we're looking at opening the office in a few weeks and just having a few members of staff back in, but there are some that won't be coming back into the office and some that have said that they can work from home. So I think we'll still have an online chat and online video calls, because we won't all be in the same place again, and I don't see us all being in the same place again for a really long time. So yeah, I think we'll still always have this.
Yeah, because I think the next thing that comes as, you know, organisations start to decide, you know, oh, half of our team want to come back to the office and half have got a flavour for working from home and decided actually I quite like this. Then you've got the, how do you manage communications between people who are in the office and then out of the office? You know, there's that balance as well. If a conversation happens in the office, how do you make sure that everybody who that's applicable to, even if they're not there, finds out about that? So I think that's going to be the next challenge that comes as well.
Yeah. Maybe a point that relates to that a wee bit is, I think somebody earlier was talking about if you have a Zoom meeting, it can be hard to keep track of who's going to do what. So one good practice with that is having a shared document open, so that as you're talking, somebody's noting into that, and you know, that link is shared in chat. Because the advantage with Office 365 and G Suite is lots of people can be in the same document at the same time, so you don't need to worry about, oh, if I'm sharing it, then nobody else can edit it or access it. So that can be quite a good way of logging action points if you need to do that. And in general, actually, for a lot of digital tools, if you use two different tools in combination together, it makes them a lot more powerful. So it could be, as Arlene was saying, Hangout discussion plus Google Drive means you can share links very easily, or as we've been doing today, not very effectively at times, a PowerPoint and a Zoom together gives a kind of, you know, I can show stuff as well as talk to you at the same time. So yeah. Okay. And any other burning questions or things that people wanted to know a bit more about? I'm just looking back through chat to see if there's anyone's. Oh, something. Yeah. So yeah, that is. So would a list of the tools that we've used today be helpful? I can certainly do that. Yeah. Grand. Jen, if there's no other questions at this point, I guess we could go to the feedback point. Is that?
Yeah, it's just a wee Google form that we've got. Just, I think there's about 5 questions on it. If you could just tell us a wee bit about what you thought of the session today. I also wanted to highlight that we've got Well, as I said at the top of the session, this is the 9th of a series of workshops that we have, with many more to come. So if you want to sign up for any that are upcoming, then just have a look at thirdsectorlab.co.uk/training. There's a couple coming up around SEO best practices. That's on page and technical SEO, and Natalie, who is running that session, is going to be doing live demonstrations. So I think that's a really good opportunity, actually, if you wanted to have your site analysed by an SEO expert. I think that's a good one. So have a wee look at that link there, and you can see the details to submit your site there. But that's it for me in terms of the wrap up there.
Great. Okay, well, we've finished slightly early. I hope that's all right. But it's been good to chat to all of you, and I hope you find some of it useful. I guess the kind of closing thought I'd leave people with is this is still very new territory for teams, so I wouldn't be too disheartened if stuff is feeling like a struggle. I think in the weeks and months to come, we'll all get to a kind of more structured and positive way of working, and probably the most difficult months are behind us now, I would hope. So hopefully those resources we'll be sharing afterwards will be useful as well. Okay.
Yep, I'll follow up with that email shortly. But
yeah.
Thank you everyone for coming. Have a lovely rest of the week.